Ah, screen's not working. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Sunday morning Bible class at the Broad Street Church of Christ. For the last 3 months, we have been seeking to answer the question, does archaeology support the Bible? I was sick last week, and I'd like to thank Randy for covering for me last week. 2 weeks ago, we began discussions on Genesis chapter 14. We discussed the first 4 battles that preceded the Battle of the Valley of Siddim. This is the battle where 4 Mesopotamian kings sought to bring 5 kings of the cities of the plain back under their control. Due to time, we stopped with the battle at Kadesh. So this week, we'll pick up where we left off in Genesis chapter 14. These are the verses where we left off, and I'll read them to refresh our memories, especially my memory. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings allied with him went out and defeated the Rephaites in Astaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzites in Ham, and the Emites in Shavah, Karathaim, and the Horites in the hill country of Seir as far as El Paran, near the desert. Then they turned back and went to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and they conquered the whole territory of the Amalekites, as well as the Amorites who are living in Hazazon Tamar. And as my usual practice, if it's in red, we'll talk about the translation there. If it's underlined, it's a place name, and we'll talk about the place names. So that slide had, or those passages had 6 place names, and we've covered 4 of those 2 weeks ago. This is actually the slide where we left off last week. So we'll move on to the side of the 5th battle mentioned in Genesis chapter 14, verses 5 through 6, and that is En Mishpat, which verse 7 tells us is Kadesh. And from now on, I'm just going to refer to the place as Kadesh. It's very easy to miss the very careful wording of Genesis chapter 14, verse 7. It says that Chedorlaomer and the other Mesopotamian kings conquered the whole territory of the Amalekites. It does not say that they conquered the Amalekites, and that would have been a very neat trick since the Amalekites were not around at the time of Abraham and this battle. This is another example of Moses, the inspired author of Genesis, using an anachronism to help his audience to understand the geography of the region. Genesis chapter 36, verses 12 and 16 explain that the Amalekites are descendants of Esau's great-grandson Amalekite. You may recall that Esau is Jacob's brother, Jacob being the grandson of Abraham, so we're talking about a long time removed from Abraham. The Amalekites are a sub-tribe of the Edomites that are about 400 years after the time of Abraham, but they would have been known to Moses' audience at the time of the conquest. The Bible does not specifically state who were the people living at Kadesh at the time of Chedorlaomer's invasion, but it was likely the Kenites. Genesis chapter 15, verse 19 states that the Kenites were present at the time of Abraham, and elsewhere in the Bible tells us that they lived in the Negev. You may recall that the Bible tells us that Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, is described as being both a Midianite and a Kenite. Today, Kadesh is identified as Tel El Quadarat, which lies in Egypt near the southern border of Israel. This is the same map I showed you 2 weeks ago. I just added the city of Kadesh, which is located in the Sinai in Egypt near the Israeli border. And just to refresh your memories, these red arrows, which I've added to the map, are the arrows of the battle or the travel of the four Mesopotamian kings. They came from Mesopotamia, they came down, attacked Asteroth Carneum first, and then Ham traveled south to Shaveh Kerathaim, and then they went through the wilderness of Seir to as far as El Paran, and then it says they turned back, and now they're going up towards Kadesh. Kadesh is mentioned 29 times in the Bible. 14 times Kadesh is mentioned without a descriptive adjective. It is mentioned once in connection with En Mishpath. In Hebrew, En Mishpat means springs of judgment or fountain of justice. This likely is in reference to both the springs of water mentioned several times in the Bible there at Kadesh and to the judgment given to Moses for striking the stone at Rephidim, which is mentioned in Numbers chapter 20, verse 11. Kadesh is mentioned 10 times as Kadesh Barnea. In Hebrew, Barnea means desert of wandering. The Israelites came to Kadesh several times during their 40 years of wandering in the desert. Kadesh is mentioned 4 times as Meribah Kadesh. In Hebrew, Meribah means quarreling. Meribah is used in the Bible to describe the 2 places where the Israelites quarreled with Moses about the lack of water, and those were Rephidim and Kadesh. This slide is a list of the archaeological studies done at Kadesh, or at least it begins those studies. In 1914, an archaeological survey, not excavations, was conducted by 2 British researchers, Leonard Woolley and T.E. Lawrence, also known as Lawrence of Arabia, on behalf of the Palestinian Exploration Fund. They identified a fortress on top of a mound about 200 feet long and 120 feet broad and about 15 feet higher than the surrounding cornfields. They considered their initial work insufficient to date the structure. During Israel's short occupation of the Sinai in 1956, Israeli archaeologist Moshe Dothan of the Israeli Department of Antiquities and Museums conducted limited excavations at the fortress. Dothan concluded that the fortress dated to the King David period, with evidence that there was occupation both before and after existence of the fortress. Between 1967 and 1982, Rudolf Cohen of the Israeli Department of Antiquities and Museums conducted the only extensive excavations at the site. His findings were published after his death by his students. According to a 210 article, the excavations uncovered copious remains dating to the Middle Bronze Age, or the time frame of Abraham. The article mentioned that the inhabitants at this layer were not Jewish, and this would be consistent with Genesis chapter 14. Cohen also discovered 3 different fortresses. One from the King David period, and this is probably the same one as described by Woolley and Lawrence in 1914. This fortress appears to have been destroyed by the Egyptians in 925 BC. The second fortress dated back to about 800 BC and may have been destroyed by the Assyrians around 730 BC. The third fortress was built around a century before the Babylonian invasion and was likely destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC. Pardon me for a second. I'm not completely over the cold that caught me last week. And my throat is drier than usual. Before I move away from Kadesh, I want to summarize the archaeology with the Bible history. The Bible tells us that Kadesh was there at the time of Abraham, and archaeology supports that claim. Archaeology also supports the claim that Kadesh was there and occupied by a Jewish population, both during the United Monarchy and the divided monarchy. Any questions about Kadesh before we move on? Okay. So next we'll move on to the site of the sixth battle mentioned in Genesis 14, 5 through 7, and that is at Hazazon Tamar. While Genesis 14 calls the place Hazazon Tamar, 2 Chronicles, chapter 20, verse 2, tells us that at some point later the name was changed to En-Gedi, and I think most of us know the place as En-Gedi. Genesis 14:7 tells us that Amorites were living at Hazazon Tamar at the time of Abraham. Amorites are descendants of Noah's grandson Canaan and inhabited both Canaan and Mesopotamia. Today, En-Gedi is a thriving tourist center, and I've talked to at least one of you in here that has been there. The ancient site of Hazazon Tamar is located near the modern town of En-Gedi at Tel Goren. And here's that same battle map, if you will. And after they came down the east side of the Jordan and the Dead Sea, got to the Red Sea here, they turned back and started turning north. They went to Kadesh, which we just left, and now they're coming back up towards the Dead Sea and to En-Gedi. En-Gedi is on the west bank of the Dead Sea. Hazazon Tamar is mentioned twice in the Bible. Once in reference to Chedorlaomer's invasion into Canaan, and the other in 2 Chronicles, chapter 20, verse 2, where Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, is warned that an Edomite army is coming against him, and it's already at Hazazon Tamar. You may recall that this here is the territory of the Edomites, 400 years after Abraham, and they're going towards Jerusalem, which is about here, and so they've already made it halfway to Hazazon Tamar. This same verse also tells us that the place is now called En-Gedi. En-Gedi is mentioned 5 other times in the Bible. Once in Joshua 15, verse 62, where it's listed among the cities and the towns inherited by the tribe of Judah. In 1 Samuel chapters 23 and 24, En-Gedi is mentioned as a refuge spot for David as he's being pursued by King Saul. In the book of Song of Songs, chapter 1, verse 14, En-Gedi is a source of henna blossoms. And in Ezekiel chapter 47, verse 10, En-Gedi is spoken as part of a prophecy of a fully restored Israel after the Babylon captivity. So this is the start of a list of archaeological studies that were conducted at Hazazon Tamar or En-Gedi. Early surveys, but not excavations, were conducted in 1865 by Edward Robinson and in 1875 by Claude R. Cooper and Herbert Kitchener, and again in 1925 by William F. Albright. During these surveys, 3 sites were identified: a pre-flood era site, a Jewish site, and a Roman Byzantine site, which is identified as Tel Goren. Pardon me for a second. In 1949, Israeli archaeologist Benjamin Mazur conducted the first excavations at Tel Goren. He discovered the remains of a Hasmonean-era citadel and potsherds from several time periods. In 1958, Israeli archaeologist Johann Aroni conducted excavations of the Roman-era buildings at Tel Goren, while Joseph Nave explored the ruins of a large building above the Engedi Spring, which was later identified as a temple dating back to before the flood. Between 1961 and 1965, Benjamin Mazur returned to Tel Goren, where he discovered a burial cave, a lime kiln, and a Roman bathhouse. He also spent time excavating the temple that dates back to before the flood. Between 1970 and 1972, Israeli archaeologist Dan Barag excavated near Tel Goren at a Jewish synagogue and adjacent buildings, which date back to the time of King Hezekiah. Also found later at this site were two personal seals dating back to the time of King Josiah. This Jewish village appears to have been destroyed during the Third Babylonian invasion around 586 BC. A second settlement on the same site appears to have been established during the Persian period. Remains from this period include jar handles bearing the letters YHD for Yehud, which was the name of a Persian area province for Judah. This settlement was in turn destroyed around 350 BC. A third Jewish settlement followed, which was also destroyed, probably by the Romans in the 1st century BC. Roman coins dating to 68 BC were found at the site. There we go. In the 1980s, Israeli archaeologist Gideon Hadass conducted several salvage excavations to prepare the Roman Byzantine village and the Jewish synagogue for public presentation. The Roman Byzantine village appears to have been founded during the mid-late to 2nd century AD and lasted until the 7th century AD. A fourth Jewish settlement also appears to have been occupied during the same time frame. The Jewish synagogue appears to have been built around the 3rd century AD. More than 5,000 coins were found in the remains of this synagogue. Both the Roman, Byzantine, and the Jewish settlements appear to have been destroyed around the to the mid-6th or early 7th century AD. Excuse me. Between 1996 and 2002, Israeli archaeologist Yizar Hertzfeld conducted several excavations of the Roman Byzantine village, the Roman bathhouse, and the Jewish village. I didn't know that slide would do that. Okay. News to me. So this is a map of the Jewish village archaeology site at Engedi. This map was drawn by Yizar Hertzfeld, who excavated the site between 1996 and 2002. The 3rd century BC synagogue is in the lower left-hand corner. This is the synagogue here. There are some buildings surrounding that, but this is the Jewish village that I've been talking about. As you can see, there was significant Jewish settlement at this time. Several of these houses had ritual baths called mikvahs, which clearly indicate that they were Jewish. This is a photo of the earliest remains at Engedi, which are believed to be a temple dating back to before the flood. Archaeologists believe that this temple represents a large settlement. The temple was not destroyed, but appears to have been abandoned quickly. A cave known as the Cave of Treasure, located about 6 miles north in the Wadi of Maraz, was discovered in 1961 and is believed to be connected to this temple. A hoard of extremely well-preserved artifacts were found in the cave, most of which were made of copper. These artifacts are believed to have been used in the temple rituals. They are believed to have been hidden for safekeeping and were not retrieved. Pardon me again. In an article published in 1986, Dr. A.J.M. Osgood argues that this temple and the artifacts found, excuse me, found in the Cave of Treasures are connected to the Amorites of Hazazon Tamar, and the reason for the quick abandonment was the invasion by Chedorlaomer and the Mesopotamian kings. These are photos of a small portion of the 429 articles found in the Cave of Treasures near En-Gedi. This hoard contains axes, chisels, hammers, mace heads, candlesticks, oil lamps, crowns, scepters, and other objects. These objects appear to have been collected quickly and hidden in the cave. They were not retrieved by those who stored them. And again, Dr. A.J. Osgood argues that these artifacts found in the Cave of Treasures are connected to the Amorites of Hazazon Tamar. This is a picture of the Jewish synagogue. This Jewish synagogue appears to have been built during the 3rd century AD. It was found accidentally in 1965 when the field around the site was plowed. It was excavated between 1970 and 72. Surrounding the synagogue is a labyrinth of small dwellings that appear to be the Jewish homes with ritual baths. More than 5,000 coins were found in the remains of the synagogue. Also found were scrolls, a bronze cup, and a menorah. The coins date back to between the 1st century BC to the mid-6th century AD. The building appears to have been destroyed by fire in the mid-6th to early 7th century AD. Yes. So as you can tell, it's a mosaic, and there are in the circle that you see in the center are animals. I wish I had brought that. It looks like a quail and a long-legged bird, and I can't tell what the other two are. And
Inspired me to start looking at synagogue imagery. I didn't even recognize or realize that they would. I thought those were animals from here, but it's hard to tell.
yeah, it's pretty far away, and it's not blown up very well.
I would not have thought that Jewish synagogues would include imagery. I don't know why it never occurred to me before.
So as you cross this road, you'll find mosaics like this, and you will find fish in some cases, and other animals.
Give me something else to study.
Yeah. Other questions on the subject? These are two photos taken during the 1961-1962 excavation by Brazil. The top photo is the base of the tower, taken from a point in the valley below, looking up towards the northeast. The bottom photo is the same side, viewed from above the side, looking down towards the southeast. Archaeologists believe that this was a Jewish military tower or outpost and is dated to the early 7th century BC, perhaps the time of King Hezekiah. How's that? Is that better? Thank you. Actually, I'll give that a try. Genesis chapter 14, verses 5 through 7 lists the sites of the 6 battles and the 7 place names. Of the 7 cities listed, 4 have been positively identified, and the other 3 have not yet been excavated. Probably never will be. The cities of Astaroth and Karnaim have been identified. Historical documents and archaeology strongly support the Bible's claims that these 2 sites existed at the time of the patriarchs and at the time of the Israeli conquest of the Promised Land. There is no archaeological data to support or refute the Bible's claims about Ham, Kiryat-Jearim, and El Paran. And those sites probably never will be excavated because they're occupied now and housing, and they're modern cities. Archaeology supports the Bible's claim that Kadesh existed at the time of Abraham and that it was occupied by a non-Jewish people, probably the Kenites, and this is consistent with Genesis chapter 14. Archaeology supports the Bible's claim that En-Gedi existed at the time of Abraham and it was occupied by a non-Jewish people. Next week, we will continue in our study of Genesis chapter 14 with the Battle of the Valley of Siddim. So it's taken us a long time to get here, but next week we're finally going to get to the battle itself, the Battle of Siddim. Any questions?
When the attacking kings came down, before they got to Egypt, they turned around. Was that because Egypt was something they didn't want to get involved with?
So I can only tell you what I know from the Bible, and the Bible tells us that they went to straighten out those that owed them tribute and had not been paying them tribute. And Egypt is not on that list. There's no reason for Egypt to have ever paid tribute to this group. So they went down as far as, let me back up a couple slides, as El Paran. It's further back than I thought. They came down and attacked these cities, took whatever they wanted to take, went down to El Paran, and then the Bible actually says, then they turned around, went north, so they went to Kadesh, took care of the folks living there, and then they went to the Amorites at Hazazon Tamar. They have not yet gotten to the 5 cities of the plain, which is the next battle that we'll talk about next week. We still got about 10 minutes, so I got plenty of time for questions if you have them.
What happened? That whole area there, things were going on. What about the rest, north and south of that area? What was happening there? You know?
Good question. So this is during the time frame of the patriarchs. The Jews have not yet moved into this area. In fact, they're not even born yet, right? It's just Abraham and Sarah. The Canaanites controlled this area in here. We're going to talk in a couple of weeks about the Phoenicians, because Abraham had some experiences with the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians were along the coast here. Of course, starting from about here, going westward is Egypt, and Egypt was a big civilization going on at that time. The Hittites were up here, and the Mesopotamian kings already had a relationship and trading partners with the Hittites, so there's no real reason for them to go up in that direction. So they were coming up, they were coming down here basically to exact their tributes. There are, in Babylon and in Assyria, there is a tremendous amount of artifacts that have been found that have come from what we now call the Canaan or Israel. So these people have been paying tribute towards the Mesopotamians for quite some time. And they came back saying, hey, we're tired of the fact that you're no longer paying us tribute, and they want to collect their tribute. Did I answer your question? I'm not sure I did.
Well, yeah, partially, but there's a whole big part of the world.
There are other civilizations around, yes. And, you know, the Egyptian civilization is going strong down here. And at times, they come up here and they claim this area, and these folks are paying tribute to the Egyptians. There are times the Hittites, which are up here, they come down and they collect tribute. On this particular case, it's the Mesopotamians, which are out over here, coming up this way and down to collect tribute from these people. He who has the biggest army collects the most tribute.
So that poor group right in there got to give money to two different civilizations depending on who had the biggest army at the time.
Yeah, well, if it was the Babylonians, then it was the Babylonians who was collecting. If it was the Assyrians, it was the Assyrians that were collecting it. If it was the Hittites were collecting it. If not them, then it was the Egyptians. And this area, this region, for thousands of years, are paying other people tribute. Often in the form of gold and silver, but sometimes in cattle and sheep and other things. In the divided monarchy period, there are a lot of artifacts found in Babylon and in Syria, all stating the kings of the monarchy, the divided monarchy period, and the amount of tribute that they've all paid to either Syria or Babylon. All that's documented. It's reliefs carved into stone, if you will. Plenty of it. We started in Genesis, I started in Genesis, and it's really the hardest period to try to prove that archaeology supports, because it's 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. As you get into the divided monarchy, there are literally dozens, 30 or 40 different steel carvings that list the kings of both Judah and Israel right out of the Bible. The kings of Assyria and Babylon, which the Bible talks about, they're there in stone. There are, like I said, plenty of archaeological evidence that supports the Bible, particularly of the divided monarchy period. Not a lot in the Solomon area, but just a tremendous amount of archaeological data from the divided monarchy period. So I picked the hardest one first. But I hope by now I've shown you that there's quite a bit of archaeology that supports the Bible. Other questions? Well, we'll quit early then and get ready for our worship service. Thank you very much. Next week we'll talk about the actual Battle of Sidium.